Informal cities. The concept of informal only exists in opposition to what is formal, referring to what is not in accordance with a certain requirements or rules. It may manifest itself in high concentrations in what we know as slums, favelas, or shantytowns. However, informality also exists, although less visible, in the people's interference with what were previously formal structures. Sometimes, depending on the context, informality is synonymous to illegality or poverty. In a global south where the legal system fails to serve the society in many aspects of life, informalities are a lot more prevalent and tolerated. Here, it mainly refers to illegal occupation of land and is enacted upon by evictions. Neither the law nor citizens give much attention to structural noncompliance. Where land ownership is not secure, planning is almost irrelevant. In the global north, where property rights are well fixed and administered, informality within the building sector is synonymous to illegality. The formal-informal juxtaposition dates to the times of the colonies. Highly rational order of the urban grid was an act of appropriation, placing the colonizers in a position of authority. The juxtaposition of diverse urban logics with that of the informal indigenous settlements worsened the associated critical connotations between the formal and informal, segregating the population and initiating long history of racial injustices. Informal settlements at the scale we know today emerged during the 1980s after the fall of the Iron Curtain, when globalized trade picked up at an exponential rate and sourcing cheap labor abroad became the standard. Inequality and poverty quickly became a global phenomenon. Changes in rural practice and new labor opportunities in the industrial sector caused an accelerating mass migration from rural areas to major cities. As the cities were unable to deal with such a rapid influx of people, informal settlements began to form at their peripheries. Some common characteristics of informal cities are an ethnic diversity, informal economy, incremental infrastructures, resilience, resourcefulness, and a strong cultural identity. There is a tendency for the media to paint a negative picture of such lifestyles, while the aspects that are valued by its residents are unrepresented and often ignored within the slum discourse. Stigmatized as places of dirt and crime, such neighborhoods are seldom visited by people from the higher social spheres. This initiates the othering of the informal sector, perpetuates the negative connotations, marginalizes, and excludes them from the political and economic processes of the city. If centrally located, informal territories are a battleground of property rights, as various city actors fight for short-term economic or political gains. In such scenarios, the rights to the city of the inhabitants have little significance, and the general tendency is to evict and replace the slum dwellings with high-rise rental housing developments, out of touch with the reality of informal living practices.
Lack of access to the basic facilities is one of the main scourges of informal settlements and a consequence of decades of governmental neglect, although often associated informality isn't poverty, but a response to it. Lack of personal safety or ownership security, inability to find a formal job that may require formal address registration or qualification, work at an early age, uncertainty about the future due to the lack of rights to land. All this and much more makes it difficult, if not impossible, to escape the circle of informality. One of the examples of informal housing is the Cuban barbacoa. This referred to the platforms constructed in the high vertical spaces of colonial buildings in the old city center that were left abandoned after the revolution. It provides housing for a large number of the Cuban population. They operate between formal and informal, both physically and politically, unauthorized and illegal by the state's standards, and yet tolerated due to its inability to provide an alternative solution. The informal alteration of the structures leads to their structural instability over time. The main hindrance to productive urban change is land ownership right. Granting legal squatting rights to residents of informal cities could be a solution that would create resident confidence in the stability of their housing and in the area where they live. It's also necessary to emphasize the importance of civic engagement. There must be a place where they can be heard, and all the process of decision-making is transparent. There exist alternative modes of slum upgrading practices instead of the popular evict display strategy, which only perpetuates the already existing problems. Marlborough South project is an example where the city derelict industry area is transformed into a more human and formal settlement. The incremental housing pilot project in India embraces the flexible and ever-changing nature of informality by designing flexible structures that can adapt to the informal lifestyle. Both case studies actively involve the inhabitants of informalities in the design of their future living. Christine Carris recognizes the importance of proximity within informal economy and proposed a landscape akin to favelas in spirit with a labyrinthine, ever-changing space. TETSO is a youth-led non-profit organization present in Latin America and the Caribbean. The organization not only helps build houses, but also finds sponsors, helps local people gain qualifications, and more. We believe that the future belongs to such an integrated approach.